What is up, everybody? Matt is back. It kind of rhymes, but I am so excited to be back for week 5 of this series. If you have not watched week 1 through 4, go back, watch those. I think it will be really helpful as we dig in today's short message where we talk about the truth about marriage, right? Marriage is very interesting. My best friend in college once told me marriage is like a sleepover every night with your best friend. Though that sounds really, really good, my best friend was 20 years old and had never been married. So when he said that, that got stuck in my head. Sounds like a great plan. I love sleepovers. I don't know about you, but have you been into a sleepover? Night 1, it's amazing, but you actually stay for multiple nights. Then week 2, you get slightly annoyed at that person. Then week 3, you're like, I just want to go home. Why am I still here? That's not how marriage is, but sometimes it can feel like that. The first time is exciting. You're like, yes, this is amazing. And then it just keeps going, and you're like, I need a little bit of space, please. That's kind of how marriage is, right? Marriage is not like this incredible sleepover night every night, but it is incredible in a different insight. I want to talk a little bit about the truth about marriage and what the Bible actually says about marriage. Most people think, when they think of the Bible in marriage, they're like Ephesians 5, right? Submission. You got to submit and they get to lead. That's what most people think about. I did a quick Google search of marriage in the Bible. Ephesians 5 was the first one that popped up. If you're new to this whole Christian thing, this whole Jesus thing, that we believe the Bible has this authority and speaks about things, and we get to go look at it. And I want to look at Ephesians 5, but a little bit differently than just submission. I think Paul, writing this letter to the church of Ephesus, actually talks more about marriage before it even gets to where it says, wives, submit to your husbands, and husbands, lead. Now, I want to read the first verse of Ephesians 5, and it says this: Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and a sacrifice to God. This is way before he talks about submission, and look at what he says. He said, be imitators, to be imitators of God. That's, I think, the first thing. When we talk about marriage, it's not just about leading and submitting, but it's if two people in this couple can be imitators of God and walk in love. That's so important when we talk about the truth about marriage, because this is one of the hardest things, right? Like, how do you be imitators of God when you're getting so frustrated at each other? How do you be imitators of God when you are so annoyed and on those days when you're like, I just need my space? How do we be imitators of God and walk in love when sometimes you just want to walk away? Marriage is not easy. And I think we have a misconception when it comes to marriage, right? We think marriage is the goal. And once we get to marriage, we're just going to be happy about everything. I'm sure you're sitting there if you're single and you're like, if I can just make it to marriage, if I can just get there, everything will be easier. I think that's far from the truth. It's actually going to be even harder sometimes to be happy, because we can make happiness the goal of marriage when it was never created to be the goal. Holiness was the goal of marriage, to be more like God. But we can get so fixated on happiness. How can I be the happiest in my marriage? And then when we're not the happiest, we can get bitter and angry at each other and say, is marriage even for me? That's because we had our eyes on the wrong goal. We had our eyes on happiness and not holiness. I want to read a second point that I said. Paul says to sacrifice. To sacrifice. I believe that is so important. To have a healthy marriage, we have to sacrifice. Oh, isn't that the hardest thing? It's so much easier to sacrifice for others, I find, than to sacrifice for our spouse in our same home. I don't know if you're like me. Sometimes I can be a little bitter. Sometimes I can hold things against people. And that comes out against my wife sometimes. But if sacrifice is something we're constantly reminding ourselves about, it's so much easier to serve. If we're constantly reminding ourselves about sacrifice, it's so much easier to serve. And that's what we have to do. We have to be imitators of God and walk in love. We have to sacrifice. And then the end of chapter 5, the very end, he says, however, let each of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Love and respect is that third point. And there's a great marriage book, actually I'm reading at home, called Love and Respect. Oftentimes, we don't know how to love each other and respect each other. And Paul is saying right here, husbands, you got to love your wife, and wives, you got to respect your husband. Because Paul knows that's what each desire. When it comes to the truth about marriage, you have to focus on the other person. And if women desire this love and men desire this respect, it becomes so much easier to sacrifice and be imitators of God once you understand those things. Those are 3 helpful things about the truth about marriage. And it can be hard because when you're single, when I was engaged, I had these false expectations of what marriage was. And breaking these verses down helped me to understand, you know what? I had the wrong motives. I had the wrong expectations for marriage. So we're going to jump into our Facebook group and we're going to discuss some of these things with some of the questions and interact with each other. But first, let me pray. Dear God, we just thank you so much for this day. We thank you for marriage, God, and it helps us to be more like you. God, I pray for everybody who is single to keep their eyes on the right thing, to keep their eyes on you, Jesus. And I just pray for all of those who are married or on the process to be married, God, that they can remember these hard truths even in hard times. In your name, amen.